I don't think I chose the topic for tonight. I think, Bob, you chose the topic. It's called Why We Need Economic Freedom. So I'm going to do it on one foot because it's such a short, easy question to answer. But I'm going to do my best, seriously, to try to give you the flavor of why I think economic freedom is important. And in particular, to set the stage for what you're going to be hearing over the next few days from some extraordinary lecturers and thinkers, and try to put it all in a little bit of a perspective for you. Now, the phrase economic freedom is a hard to define phrase, right? It can mean a lot of different things to different people. Some people might call it free market. Some might call it classical liberalism. Some might call it neoliberalism if they don't like it, which is a new coinage, a new expression, a bitui of the last few years. But I want to define it myself tonight the way I think about it, which is when I talk about economic freedom, I'm talking about a situation where government does not control or try to control outcomes that emerge from the market choices of buyers and sellers, okay? So it's not about anarchy. You know what anarchy is, right? So I don't want zero government. I understand that markets work best in a framework of rule of law, where there's expectations, right? It's not no government. What I'm talking about when I say economic freedom is limited government. So government allows consumers, investors, workers, and entrepreneurs, really the four cornerstones of any economy, they generally leave them alone. Now, it doesn't mean that, again, no government. If you defraud, you know what that word is? Defraud. If you lie, manipulate, harm people with your product, you may have legal consequences. You may be taken to court. So it's not anything goes. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a world, and other people who lecture you over this next few days may think about this differently, but I'm talking about a world where government doesn't try to determine outcomes. They don't, for example, try to change the prices. There's no price controls. There's no minimum wage. There's no quotas or tariffs. That is, there's free trade. You can import things from anywhere in the world if you want to buy them. So no subsidies to housing, to other kinds of behavior that the government might want to encourage. So that is what, when I say limited government, I'm talking about a world where government does not play with the prices or the outcomes of the free choices of individuals interacting in a market economy, not zero government. So, do you want to live in that world? Do you want to live in a world where you can buy whatever you want from abroad if someone is willing to bring it and try to sell it to you, where you can get in an Uber, which you can't in Israel? We talked earlier, how many people here have taken a real Uber outside of Israel in a foreign country? Raise your hand. It's a pretty pleasant experience for most of the time. People who stayed in Airbnb, which is legal in Israel, but it might not be. Somebody could say that's a bad thing. So in my world, government lets those things go. They let Airbnb exist, they let Uber exist, and so on. Do you want to live in that world? Well, of course you do for the Uber part or the Airbnb part, but do you want to live in a world where if people want to buy food or other things from abroad, some Israeli producers may not be able to stay in business, in competition with that foreign competition? Do you want to live in that world? Do you want to live in a world where workers don't have a guaranteed minimum income? Right? So we might think about, as I do all the time, two things. What's good for me? That's a reasonable question. Certainly we all are interested in what's good for me, but we also should care about what's good for other people who aren't like me, right? So if I'm going to make a case for economic freedom, it can't just be for me, right? Can't just be for me. It has to be a world I want my children to live in, my grandchildren to live in, and they may not be like me. They may not have my skills. They may have different abilities. So I'm trying to think about a world I want them to inherit, them to have the enjoyment of, as well as people who are very different from me. They may have very different things they care about, things they're good at, and so on. So when we're making the case, some institutions try to say, oh, this would be great for you. But whoa, I don't just care about me. Is there anyone here who just cares about themselves? Probably not, right? We care about our friends, we care about our loved ones, and many of us care about people who are not relatives, who are strangers, who have different challenges. So how should you think about that? So let me ask you a question. Would Israel, which has a long tradition of a very large and active government, right? Would Israel be a better place if it had smaller government, or would it be a better place with bigger government? That's a question I want you to think about. Not zero, not communism, but what direction should we be headed in here in this country? The right question would be, if I say, would Israel be a better place, what would be a good question to ask? Better for whom? Or if your English isn't very good like mine, better for who? But I think it's supposed to be whom. But I found out, a lot of Israelis actually don't speak Hebrew very well. Shocking. My wife's in Ulpan. She's actually learning official Hebrew, but it's actually not necessarily the way people speak. Like, she knows all the feminine, masculine things. I asked a friend of mine, an Israeli, are michnesayim, or pants, masculine or feminine? He said, I don't know. He asked his kid, who's 14. Does anybody know? You think it's masculine? You're pretty sure?
In Israel, we have a very big government, so we have a government agency.
Exactly. And it's one of my favorite examples. Language is one of my favorite examples of something that government might want to control but cannot, right? My favorite example of this is in France. In France, I know many languages badly. So I was going to say, in France, it's sofa shavua, but it's not. In France, Saturday and Sunday are called le weekend. The weekend, right? And of course, Hebrew has imported many, many words from English. So when I can't think of a word, I always have a shot at it by putting in an English word. I always also like to point out, while we're on language, it's kind of awkward. There's no Hebrew word for fun. It's an Arabic word. Kef is not a Hebrew word. Not a Hebrew word. There's no, a lot of Hebrews are from the Bible. The Bible's not a fun book. It's an important book. I'm a big fan of it, but there's not a lot of fun in the Chumash. It just, okay. But le weekend is not the official name of Saturday and Sunday in France. The official name is fin de semaine, or sofa shavua, same literal translation, end of the week, right? And the official French government agency, I'm digressing now, sorry, Bob. The group of people in France who decide what is good French and what is bad French are called the Immortals. Is that the most pretentious name you've ever heard? Am I right? That's their name. The Immortals. I mean, that's a bureaucracy. That's a committee I want to be on. Oh, what's your business card say? Russ Roberts, Immortal. Oh, I like that. So, but there's also one in Israel that decides what's official Hebrew. Of course, it can't control how people speak, the words they use, etc. Right, okay.
Imagine when the Immortals try to actually ban basketball and try to convince French people to say panier, ballon panier, or something like it.
But everyone says basketball, of course. Okay. So I'm asking the question, I got the better for whom thing, that's where we were. So will Israel be a better place if government is bigger or if government is smaller? And the one question you could respond to that with is, well, better for who? Better for everybody? No. Nothing is better for everybody, hardly. Not right away, at least. So you could ask, who's it good for? So I would suggest that when we think about this choice, again, think about where Israel is now. Should we move in this direction, say, toward less government, or this direction toward more government? A lot of people think it's a question between who should have more power, business or government? And when you phrase it that way, it's kind of not so, I don't think that's the right way to think about it. But let's try for a bit. What's business try to do? If you're running a business, what are you trying to do? Make a profit. Make as much money as possible, generally. Is that a good idea? Would you want to have a system if you have less government? Usually people would say you have more scope, more opportunity for businesses to do what they want. Is that going to be a good thing if all they care about is money? And most people go, no, I don't want that, right? Because what do I want instead? I want decisions made not by businesses who are selfish, right, greedy. I want decisions made by the government because they are, right, they care about people, right? And don't you want decisions made by people who care about people rather than selfish people? Okay, so that's the usual argument. I think that's a total misunderstanding of two things, business and government. Now, I don't defend business. What I defend is the competitive process that businesses have to live in, which means the profit and loss system, which has two parts. Guess the first part's profit. Guess what the second part is? Loss. You've got to have both. You can't have a profit system. Companies that do well make a lot of money, and the companies that don't do well make a lot of money. You got to have a system where companies that do well make a lot of money, companies that do poorly go out of business, lose money, profit and loss. So no bailouts in my limited government world, right? That's against the rules. You don't insulate people from the consequences of their decisions. The problem is, the reality is that business doesn't just care about money. What else do they care about? A lot of things. They're human beings, right? So if you are Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, and you're also young, you don't remember Amazon when it got started. When it got started, anybody know what year it was?
1990s?
99, 2000, do you know? Let's say 2000. I remember a guy told me, he says, it's an amazing thing. You get on your computer and you enter your information and they send you books. I said, how do you pay for it? He said, you put your credit card in. I said, you put your credit card number on the internet to a bunch of strangers? Which was very scary at the time. And he did. Now, do you think Jeff Bezos gets satisfaction from the fact that he has allowed millions and millions of people to have access to millions and millions of books? And I think the answer is yes. I think that is something that gives him pleasure. He doesn't just care about the money. He likes the money, I'm sure. But it's not the only thing he cares about. And in many ways, it may be not the most important thing at this point. It's how he's changed the world. That's what he cares about. And similarly, most people in government don't just care about social justice. What do they care about?
Give service to their citizens.
What?
In an ironic way, to give service to their citizens and to give direction to the country in some ways. But government, business, or governments can make it themselves.
Right, but even, that's the nicest way to put it. But they also care about themselves. They're self-interested also. They want to stay in power. What? They want to stay in power. They want to stay elected. Some of them are dishonest, right? So they both are complicated, the business versus government. Plus, there's a third thing that's really important that we often forget about. And that's called a nonprofit, an amutot, the amutot, right? That's what we're doing right now, right? This enterprise, the Friedberg Economics Institute, do we pay them? Do they get any money? We don't charge them, do we? Do we charge you to come? Do you have to pay a fee to come? Well, that's not capitalism. That's not free market. Of course it is. It's just not the kind that's driven by profit. It's covered by donations. I'm the president of Shalem College. We have no revenue. None. We don't charge our students a single penny. How do we exist? Donations. That's an important part of modern developed economies, Israel especially, the United States especially. So a huge part of the good things that happen in a society are not done by business, and they're not done by government. They're done by this other thing called nonprofit. All of them are about people working together to achieve something. They're all important. But I would argue that it's important as to which activities are done by which parts of those three things. Okay. By the way, even though we're a nonprofit, and even though we don't take any money from the government, Shalem College is highly regulated by the Council of Higher Education, the Malad, with just a footnote. Interesting. Okay. So here's the question. So to finish the first part, for me, economic freedom is about allowing people to take chances, starting businesses, starting nonprofits, to compete, tacharut, right? Competition, to compete and provide something that either attracts consumers or donors. Economic freedom is about unleashing, setting free creativity and competition to make the world better. So here's the question. Why is it important? Why do we need it? It's nice, okay, it's a good story. Do we need it? I mean, is it really, can't we do most things through government or at least through highly regulated businesses or highly regulated amutot, like Shalem College is highly regulated? We can't start a new major without permission from the government. We have to get our syllabi approved. We have to have a certain number of bathrooms. Because, you know, if we were on our own, could you turn off the tape for a minute? No, I'm just kidding. It's a secret. No, they regulate everything. They regulate how many toilets are in the building, right? Because they're worried that we're going to not give enough toilets. Go figure. Maybe we would. I don't know. Okay, so why is it important? Why are you guys here? Why does Bob Lawrence care about this? Why do the people who support this program financially, why do they care?
To get more people to be active about it.
Why do they care, though? Why is it important?
Because there are values other than profit.
What?
Because there are values other than profit.
There are values other than profits. Sure, that's why they care about. But why do they think it's important? Why does Bob or me think it's important that Israel have economic freedom, have less government than it has now? Why would we care? Why do we care? Yes, we do care about things other than money, right? This isn't a money-making enterprise. But why are we passionate about it? Why is it important for the future of the country? We're trying to create a better country, but what would the argument be? Give me a tweet. Give me 144 characters. Is it 144? I've already lost track. Is it two? What is it now? Anyway, it's short. Give me a sentence or two as to why we should have economic freedom.
So the next generation make smarter economic decisions.
So the next generation, why is that important? Yeah.
I think that everyone who reads the facts and sees the empirical evidence sees that there's a high correlation. It's very statistically significant between economic freedom and overall flourishment and democracy, and the average Joe on the street is much better. So I think the reason.
What's better mean?
Better means they have better access to better healthcare, to better education on average. They means they have more options. They have more options to do whatever they want, to donate to whatever that they have more.
I'm smiling because when you said better education, I thought, well, wait a minute there. Whoa. Now, does Israel have a good education system? No. Horrible, right?
No.
Same with the United States, by the way.
No, but what I meant to say is that however you define it, however you measure education, and there's a good way to measure education, economic freedom and a higher level education goes together hand in hand across the board.
Okay, however, correlation is not causation necessarily. Sometimes things are correlated that are not causal. But I'm asking actually a harder question, which is, what do you care about? What do you care about? Like, a lot of people actually believe, smart people I don't just like, but people I respect deeply, a lot of people believe that economic freedom is important because it makes you rich, right? It's part of what you're saying, not the whole story. You said more than that. But they say economic freedom is important because if you have economic freedom, you'll be richer. And there's certainly a correlation, right? There's a problem. There is one data point that's challenging. What would that data point be? China. But we can answer that. How would I answer that? How did China get... China is a socialist authoritarian state. and yet they have the greatest growth rate probably of, over decades of any time in human history, and they're doing great overall materially. If you care about economic freedom, what's your answer to that?
I don't know how to say it in English, but
What?
we said in Nemo Devacha, I don't know how to say it.
Well-being.
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 What?
Well-being.
Well-being.
But wealth is divided.
Every
Most wealth is
Well-being.
Wait a minute. No. Here's the question. If economic freedom makes you rich, how did China get rich? They're not free. They're a socialist, authoritarian economy. You have to argue they're more free than they used to be, right? Which is true. But I'm not sure, even though I like economic freedom, I'm not sure that that's the reason that China is richer than it used to be. Hang on, we'll save for questions. I can see I've opened a Pandora's box here, a phrase that I understand Israelis understand, which is exciting. Sometimes we say that in English. Sometimes we say a can of worms, which is a very strange expression. I'd like to know where it came from. I don't know where. Fishing? No, you don't have a can of worms, ever. I don't. And if you did, you wouldn't open it. Okay. I don't think. Anyway, my point is this. The standard argument for economic freedom is it leads to growth, and growth is good, which it probably is, and growth is better than not growth, but it is a complicated thing because, I don't know about you, but money is not the only thing I care about. I like it, it's good, but it's not the only thing, okay? So I don't think that's the reason. It's not the reason that I love economic freedom. It's a selling point, it's a plus, but it's not the main thing. The main thing I care about is getting at some of the things you were talking about, which are not just health, but a sense of meaning in life, a sense of dignity, a sense of responsibility, a sense of respect for yourself. I believe that economic freedom allows people to achieve more of that and more money, and that's why, to me, it's important and attractive. So I'm going to tell a short economic story here. In 1900, there were 40% of the American people worked in agriculture. How do you say agriculture? Good. I didn't hear that, but it sounds like you all know what it is. It sounded similar. So think about that. 40% worked on producing food. 40%. Do you know what the number is now in the United States? About 2%. An incredible revolution in human industrial productivity change. Oh my gosh, the transformation's incredible. America went in 1900 from a fundamentally rural, meaning countryside country, to an urban city economy, manufacturing, knowledge, etc. What an incredible change. And think about how it happened. What happened is that a bunch of people, all working without coordination, not working together, all working on their own, in teams, sometimes with other people, figured out a whole bunch of ways to make the land more productive. And what that meant is that you couldn't operate a small farm anymore and cover your cost, which meant what? You went out of business. So you had to merge farms got larger and larger and larger, and they needed fewer and fewer people to work. So you went from 40% to 2%. And if you had told a farmer in 1900 that in the next 100+ years, America was going to go from 40% of its people working in farming to 2%, the farmer would have said, that's going to be horrible because they're going to starve to death. No, it's going to be okay. And then the farmer would have said, but what are the people going to do if they're not working on the farm? And you would tell them what? Oh, there'll be computer scientists, there'll be engineers, there'll be flying airplanes. No idea what you're talking about. No idea. And you tell them, oh, don't worry, there are going to be new jobs that replace the old jobs. Well, why would he trust you? That would be absurd. That's a terrible, crazy idea. And he would be very scared about the future. But if he were alive today, he would see that it turned out pretty well. And the way it turned out, think about this is what's incredible. Look at this. Think about how crazy this is. You see this? Through most of human history, this would be one of the greatest achievements of all time. Not just enough food for us to get by, but enough food to make us fat, right? That's the world we live in. A world where our biggest problem is staying thin, not staying alive. It's a crazy, miraculous change. Food's cheap. Some people say it's too cheap, that we can afford to leave it out. We're going to throw, a bunch that's going to get thrown away, right? Which makes no sense unless it's not that expensive. It's fairly cheap. So we don't take care of food the way people took care of food 50 years ago. We're much more, the word in English is profligate, which is not a good word for a non-native speaker. But anyway, we're much less careful with our food. If you're not careful, you'll think that's the most important thing about the food revolution that we just talked about. The most important thing is the price of food went down, and that allowed people to have a higher standard of living. And it's fantastic. It is. It's fantastic. But that's not the most important. It's only one of the most important things. There are two important things. That's one. The second is the millions of people who grew up on a farm don't have to be farmers anymore. They could go do something else because we don't need to devote 40% of our people to feeding us. In fact, we have too much food. We have fat people, and we export it to the rest of the world, which is a mixed bag. We'll talk about that later if you want. But the point is that the reason the revolution of productivity in agriculture is meaningful and important is that it allowed the next generation after those farmers to do something other than farming. There were other things to do. Why? Because people didn't have to spend so much money on food. They had money left over and resources left over to start new industries. If you have 40% of your economy in food, you don't get Tel Aviv. You don't get Silicon Valley. You don't get an airplane industry. You don't get Hollywood. You don't get video games. You can't have any of that. And truth be told, a lot of that's not important. But it is important to the people who built it, the people who cared about it, the people who were passionate about it, the people whose dreams were involved in creating new things. Those new things couldn't have happened in a world with 40% farming. So what economic growth and innovation and freedom achieve isn't just a higher standard of living. It's a more meaningful, satisfying life where you, especially you, young, alive, dynamic people with dreams and hopes and things you want to achieve, will be able to mold the world that you will inherit according to your dreams, your skills, rather than having to do what your parents did. That's what the world was like for 2,000 years, right? For 2,000 years, when you grew up, you got to sit or stand behind the rear end of a cow or a horse doing farming. That was life for most of humanity, for most of history. And you have the great gift, and I have it too, of being able to apply my brain to 1,000 things that excite me, interest me, etc. So, my point is, it's not about the money. Money's nice. Nobody should starve. It's great to have, you have to have money. And money lets you do all kinds of things that you also referenced. You can have better health. You can do all kinds of things. But the real issue is about flourishing. Sigsug enoshit. Is that right? What? Without the enoshi? Sigsug enoshi. That's what it's about. It's about having a meaningful life, a purposeful life, a life of satisfaction, a life of respect, a life of dignity, a life of autonomy, a life where you get to decide what you want to do. And economic freedom allows you to choose that. Let me close with two examples. Three things. First of all, what's the single biggest social problem in Israel? Well, it's a long list, right? We could debate it. right? It's not obvious. There are a few problems here, right? One of them that is interesting for an economist is the price of housing, right? Price of housing in Tel Aviv especially, also Yerushalayim, over the last 10 years, 20 years, just keeps going up and up. What do we do about it? What should we do about it? A lot of people say, you know, we had a little bit of a revolt where people protested, government got to do something. So should we have bigger government or smaller government? So we'll do a couple quick case studies. Bigger government, what are the people who want more government to do to fix housing? Regulate it. How? Either could have rent control, or you could subsidize, give people money to buy so they could afford to buy the house. Or they could just throw fuel on the fire and light a big match, because those things don't solve the problem. They make it worse, right? If you pay people, such a tragic idea, but I understand the appeal of it. If you pay people to rent houses, you're going to push up the or apartments, you're going to push up the price, right? It's not going to solve the problem. Is there a way to solve the problem with less government? And I would argue, yes, there is. One of the reasons that housing is so expensive in Israel is how long it takes to build a house. And how long it takes to build a house, get the permission, get the land, get the permission to use the land, et cetera, is a huge part of why it's expensive. It's a big, big problem here. So we have two problems. We have supply and demand, right? A lot of people want to live here now. Wonderful, great. But there's not enough supply. And I think the government's part of the problem that there isn't more supply. So that's questions of the sex. That's number one. Number two, education. Government runs the education system, K through 12. I don't know, what do we call it here? K through 12. What? Well, go ahead.
Mandatory education.
Okay, from, you know what I'm talking about. Mainly a government system. I don't think it's run very well. If I were in charge, I would want less government in the school system. But that doesn't mean more profit motive, right? That's a very important point tonight. Less government doesn't mean more profit motivated activity. We could have amutot involved more, as of course they already are, in the provision of education. Same problem in the United States. Last thing, and then I'll take questions. I care about people who don't flourish, right? It's easy to say, oh, the economy is great, it's going to allow human flourishing. But not everybody flourishes. Not everybody has so many gifts. Not everybody is going to be part of this. The average is going to go up when you have economic freedom, but even if that's true, there are going to be people who are left behind. Important thing to remember, a couple important things. Number one, the economy is not a zero-sum game. Israel is much richer than it was 75 years ago, 50 years ago. Who's poorer? Nobody. Nobody had to be poor so that Israel could be rich. Israel got rich, in my view, by allowing its people's skills to be expressed. It didn't make anybody poorer. Jeff Bezos is a very wealthy man. He didn't make people poorer. He made them richer. He made me much richer. He gave me access to books and many things that made my life more interesting, more thoughtful, more pleasant, and so on. So the growth that is part of economic freedom does not necessarily, and usually does not, come at the expense of other people. There are exceptions to that, though, because sometimes government gives people privileges that allows them to take advantage of other people. So my guess is the people who own land in Tel Aviv and who own land in Yerushalayim, the largest holders, are probably not so excited about liberating the real estate market, just like the 25,000 taxi drivers are not so excited for Uber to have a chance to be here, right? So sometimes government is the source of the worst kinds of inequality and the things that are troublesome. But even so, I want to make the point that I care about the people at the bottom, but I really care the most about their ability to rise, That's what I think is the most important thing, because if you care about human flourishing, shouldn't be encouraging the idea that everyone should be equal, which is a dangerous idea in my view. What we should care about is certainly equal opportunity, but certainly equal opportunity to rise, to do well. And in the current Israeli system, just like in America, education is an enormous handicap for people to have a chance to get ahead and to do better than their parents. So that's the thing I would focus on, less about inequality for its in and of itself, and more on to make sure that people have a chance to grow, to build their own gifts. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Let's take some questions. Yeah.
You talked in the beginning about having no minimum wage.
No minimum wage, correct. You know why?
Why?
I don't care about people. Who cares? The poor people? No, why? It's a very good question. That's not your question. Maybe it is. Ask your question. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead and explain it.
Go ahead. Okay, so
Why is he in favor?
what's the argument against the minimum wage? So let's take a step back. Under business, we said businesses are motivated by what? Profit. What protects me from their eagerness to make money? Which is funny, because here's a business. This is not a charity, right? This is not, you go over to your friend's house for dinner, it's not as good as this. There might be a couple extra peaches available or nectarines, but your friend's not going to have 60 or 70, of which some are going to go to waste because, I mean, why? Why did they do this? Why did they put so much food out that's going to get thrown away? They threw away money. I thought they care about profit. Why did they do that? What? Competition, but why? What's the role of competition in this? The simple answer is that there's two mistakes you can make when you order food. What's that? Too much and too little. Which is the one they wanted to make? Too much. Now, by the way, we paid for it. They're not nice, right? It's built into the price of the food, right? Because guess what? Bob doesn't want it. Oh yeah, I went to that program, that Friedberg thing. Yeah, I mean, the dinner speaker was fantastic, but they ran out of food halfway through. I'm not going back to that, right? You have to, there's a lot going on there, but the key part is competition, because there's another hotel that we could, if every time Bob came here, the food wasn't very good and they ran out early, we wouldn't come back. So what protects us from exploitation, a verb I learned recently, Ivrit, and I've totally forgotten. What's the Hebrew word to exploit? The what? Nitzul. Linsul. Nitzul. Nitzul. The thing that protects you from exploitation is competition. So we have a woman who cleans our house sometimes here. Yerushalayim. What do we pay her? Nothing. She doesn't have any skills and I'm selfish. No, I don't pay her nothing. I pay her a reasonably large amount. She doesn't have a union. She doesn't speak Hebrew. She's not Israeli. She's an immigrant.
You pay taxes?
Do I pay taxes? Am I supposed to? Am I supposed to?
Yeah.
Turn off the video.
Yes, just say yes.
Yes, of course I pay taxes. Of course I do. So, why do I pay her what I pay her? Not because I'm nice. Because if I don't pay her, she's going to go clean somebody else's house instead. There's a market that sets I don't set the price. I can choose to pay it. I can choose to clean my own house. Or if I pay it, it's set by the market, and it's her alternatives that protect her from being exploited. I would love to pay her less. Not a nice person. Pretend. I am a nice person, but pretend. Right? What protects her is competition. Similarly, there are situations where there's not much competition and you get taken advantage of, right? So, my argument is, in the case of the minimum wage, what protects the worker today is the minimum wage, right? There's a floor. It's a minimum amount. Pretty good thing. Except, what if you aren't worth to an employer that amount? Does anybody know the minimum wage? I don't know. I'm new. I've only been here a year.
6,000.
How much?
5,200.
5,000. 5,200 shekels a month. Okay. So 5,200. Suppose you cannot provide 5,200 shekels per month of value to an employer. What's your actual wage? Zero. You don't have a job. Now you can say, oh, people shouldn't pay attention to that. They should hire them anyway. But they don't in general. So basically, it's like saying, okay, let's say, how many people here are working right now? Okay, you have a job, you have a salary, right? I assume some of you are making more than the minimum wage. Okay, so as I said, I have good news for you. Great news. I've told your employer that they have to double your salary. Oh, that's so great. I'll get a better apartment, I'll get a motorcycle, I'll have better food, I'll go on vacation, I'm going to go to Italy. But of course, would you be excited if I told your employer they had to pay double? Maybe. It depends. The answer could be, as long as you keep your job, I'd be excited. But if you lose your job, it's not exciting at all. So basically what the minimum wage does is raise the price of low-skilled people to their employers. If you keep your job under that situation, it works out well. But if you don't keep your job, it works out very badly. And it works out very badly in the worst possible way, which is that the least skilled people, by the way, the hotel's fantastic. Don't they give you too much food? They run the air conditioning at about 14, right? It's fantastic. It's freezing in here. It's the coldest I've been since, well, no, it isn't. But anyway, nothing like winter in a stone house where the heat doesn't work. Really, there's nothing like it. Okay. If you cannot get a job, it's very depressing. And who is going to have the hardest time finding a job in the middle with a minimum wage? The least skilled of the low-skilled people. It's a very cruel policy. It basically exploits the poorest of the poor to help the slightly better off poor to get a higher salary. Yeah.
A counter argument would be those people who can't make minimum wage. It's very simple. The government should give them subsidies.
That's exactly.
We have disabled people who are unable to work, period.
Correct.
Not able to work for $10.
Absolutely. And that's why
they should get government money, and those people should get government money as well. I saw the problem.
You did, and the argument would be in America or here, that's exactly why we need what's called a universal basic income. So for people whose skills are so low, they can't provide for themselves, we'll provide. Who's we? The government, the taxpayers, and so on. It's not the worst idea in the world, maybe. There's an argument to be made for it. Here's the problem with it, though. It does take away from a person's dignity, in my view. In my view, might be wrong. It's a serious question I think the world's going to be grappling with, dealing with over the next 20, 25 years. How important is it that you have a job? Right? What if we come to a world, this is the world we thought we were entering about 5 years ago. This is really funny when you think about it. 5 years ago, we were going to have driverless cars any minute. Remember that? Do you remember? Any minute. You're kind of young, but what?
They said in 2018.
2018. Yeah, by 2018, well, so, or 2022. It's, my joke is there's a sign in the bar. It's a permanent sign over the bar. It says, free beer tomorrow. I'm here. Where is it? It's tomorrow. You come back tomorrow. Free beer tomorrow. So it is a little bit like that. We said, 2018 probably, 2021 for sure, 2020, well, it may not happen. But the interesting thing is that if it did happen, there would have been millions of people out of work. Millions in the United States, hundreds of thousands here, who drive taxis, who drive trucks, right? Those people would be out of work. What are they going to do? Well, they'd be like the farmers.
Flourishing.
What?
Flourishing.
They wouldn't be flourishing, right? At least not right away. But the question would be, what would come along that they would be able to do? Think about this. It's hard to imagine, because it's not the world we live in. If we really could have real driverless cars and taxis, Monit was 10%, 20% of what it is now. If the delivery with trucks of all our goods was a fraction of what it is now, it's a little like free food, right? You get all of a sudden a bunch of other things would be possible. Well, what would those be? I don't know. But creative people would find ways to make new things, and it could be a fabulous world. But what about those millions of workers who can't be part of it because they don't have a job? And the answer would be, oh, that's okay. We're so rich now because we have cheap cars and cheap trucks. We can afford to give them a big check from tax money, and we could. But I'm not sure that would be a world that they want to live in. I think they might like the world better where they drive, for example, or where they do something else. So I don't want to hurry along artificially with a high minimum wage, the world where a bunch of people can't produce something productively. That would be, I think, a mistake. Yeah.
In the personality study, there's a few conclusions about low IQ workers. And one of the problems we raised is as long as the time passes, there's less and less jobs for the low IQ. Lower used to be 5%, it's coming to 15%, and it's going to get to 30% when we don't need to drive anymore. So we say they will want to work, and I agree. I think one of the things that we contribute to is to a person's quality of life,
Self-worth.
self-worth, and meaning in his life. And what are you doing about the 30%, or even I don't know? We probably get. I wish we get 80 one day. What do you do about those people? What kind of work can you give those who are not the top edge of the society?
Can I add, like, for these new jobs, you need more education. For more education, you need more money.
So the real question is, whoa, time out. The real question is, and it's not an easy question, what's the world going to look like if that's the world that comes along? And the answer is we don't know. The answer is, so I don't know if this is true, but in our minds, the world's going to get more and more like me, right? More and more like me, PhD. Everybody's going to need a PhD. Well, it turns out a PhD is not so practical in most things, not so useful. I don't think we'll go to a world where everyone gets a PhD. I think that's a mistake. There might be a world, I could imagine it, there might be a world, Tidyadmenu? No, close. Tidadyemu? No. So hard. Tidadyenu. Ken? Tidadyenu olam, a world. Imagine a world where one of the most scarce things is a human being who looks in your eyes and cares about you. Right? I heard this first, the first time I heard this was from Megan McArdle, a version of this. You know, you walk into you want your nails done, right? You want to get a manicure. So, and while we're at it, a haircut, okay? So there's a booth. You go stand in the booth, and a smart machine figures out your shape, gives you a haircut, cuts your nails, trims your this, polishes your teeth, you know, and then you walk out. 3 minutes later, you're a new person, right? And you don't have to talk to the manicurist, and you don't have to talk to the hair cutter, and you don't have to talk to the dentist. But there might actually be people who enjoy the human contact, and maybe people with lower IQ who aren't intellectual and can't master computer science, maybe they'll have a special advantage in being a human being. What a novel idea, right? A lot of the most talented people I know in the knowledge economy, I don't want to have dinner with, right? They're hard to talk to. They're awkward, right? Maybe it would be great to have some nice low IQ friends to go drink with and play cards with and go to the basketball game.
You made a job for your friend.
Yeah.
We interviewed on our podcast, we interviewed Charles Murray, and he said exactly that. He said that IQ and some of my best friends are not intellectuals, and
Yeah, IQ, actually, I think IQ is highly overrated, but anyway, other questions? Any other questions? Yeah, sorry.
I want to ask you, you haven't talked about the limits of free markets. I want to ask you, what do you think is out of the sphere of free market? Should we sell blood? Should we sell
Kidneys.
Should we sell
Kidneys.
Should we sell
Yeah, so by the way, so it's not just about buying and selling, right? It's not just about buying and selling. It's also what do we allow people to do voluntarily in the amutot area, right? So some of the things that I see as easy example, I would love for government to get out of education and let charities, nonprofits, amutot, create schools, right, instead of government-provided schools. So I think that would be a much better education. There'd be a lot more choice. That's a longer story. But in terms of buying and selling, so should you be able to buy and sell your kidneys? I have 2. How about you? I have an extra, right?
There's an expert in the technique who can make sure you have more if you want.
There's a what?
There's someone in the technique who's developing kidneys from scratch.
Oh, nice. Okay, so that's where, but the reason that person at the Technion is developing artificial kidneys is because we don't have enough. What? Because you're not allowed to get, I have an extra one. I can give it away, right? I can give it away, and people do. People give away their kidneys to strangers, which is amazing. But guess what? There aren't very many of those people. And there are a lot of people who die every year because they don't have a working kidney. So, you know, there's one country, as far as I know, at least this was true 5 years ago, there's only one country in the world where you can sell your kidney in a somewhat market-oriented way. It's Iran, which is weird, interesting. Not exactly the bastion of free market activity. But I'm okay if that's the limit. If you say you can do anything, you can buy and sell anything except your body, fine. I'm okay with that. I'd love to have more freedom everywhere else. What? Guns? What was the second thing? Oh, children? So, blood, I think would be okay. Oh, I'm in favor of, I think drugs should be, you should be able to buy whatever you want. Mushrooms, LSD, heroin, absolutely. No, of course, that's your choice. Now, here's the thing.
You should carry their own consequences. The problem is that we're paying for prisoners. If somebody is using heroin and doing a horrible thing because of it, we're paying for it.
I agree. So that gives you the right, as a taxpayer, to limit their freedom. I would encourage you not to use that right. I'll give you an example. Somebody on the street asks me for money. It happens every day in Yerushalayim, right? Somebody asks you for money. Should I give them the money? No. Why not? Because they might spend it on alcohol or drugs. So I'm going to treat them like a child. I'm going to say, look, I know you have a miserable life. You don't have a job. Maybe you're homeless. You're living on the street. But here, let me give you over here. I know you're unhappy, so here's an apple. Right? It's not nice. It's not nice. Person's on a motorcycle. Do you have to wear a helmet in Israel?
Yes.
Okay, it's law. And one of the arguments is, well, because if he has an accident, which should happen every day, I can't believe how, I assume it does, yeah, but it should happen every time I see them. They drive very recklessly and loud, too. Like, is it a special motorcycle they sell here? Amazing. So you could say, because I'm going to pay for your health care, I have the right to tell you that you must wear a helmet. And that's for sure true. You should have the moral right. But I think a truly moral person should say, you're an adult. You are going to take your own chances. I am going to pay for it. You could say, we could have a law that says if you don't wear a helmet, you don't get free health care. That's also not very nice. I don't like that either, right? But my view is if you're going to provide free health care, let people choose to be adults. That doesn't give you the right to treat them like children. It's a terrible thing, right? So a person who's hungry and desperate and despair and full of tragedy, and I give them an apple when they want alcohol or drugs, shouldn't I give them the respect of a fellow human being and say, my own children for sure. I understand that when they were little. Now they're adults. I treat them like adults. But when they were little, I did not let them take heroin. Yeah, I didn't. I tried to stop them from taking heroin. But what right do I have to treat you as a child? Now, here's the thing that's hard to remember. I don't think people should sell their children. And I don't think they should murder people. And I don't think they should take drugs. And I don't think they should watch a lot of television. And they probably should take Twitter off their phone, which I spend way too much time looking at. So we understand those things are not so good for us. Twitter is not good for us. Drugs are not good for us. Alcohol in excess is not good for us. But we're human beings. And the essence of an adult life is respect for the choices that other people make. And just because it's legal doesn't mean it's okay. Right? Can you imagine a world where we say it's legal to take drugs and you shouldn't?
Yeah.
That's my world.
But I would say
We're way off the track here, Bob. Yeah.
So I have a question about nature.
Yeah.
Nature reserves.
The environment, national parks.
Yeah, national parks. What do you think about that?
Well, I kind of like national parks. They're probably my favorite places. In America, anybody been to a national park in America? Yosemite is one of my favorite places on earth. I'm glad it's not an amusement park. I'm glad it's not a place of, with a Ferris wheel and a roller coaster, and right. It's not a profit-making institution. On the other hand, Yellowstone National Park. Anybody ever been to Yellowstone? Amazing place. They ruined it. The government ran it. They didn't have a profit motive. They had a different motive. They took out all the wolves. They did 1,000 things to play with the ecosystem, and they didn't do a very good job. So it's a mixed bag. But again, I'm totally okay with government running national parks. And Israel's lovely. I can make an argument for why it'd be better for it run as private nature reserves. There are such things. You could allow people to do it that way. You could have charities run them. There are many ways to do it. But in the list of things that the government runs that I think are run badly, that I wish were otherwise, national parks are way down here. Also, the roads, that would be down here too. You could have private roads instead of government roads. It's not one that keeps me up at night. I'm okay with the government doing the roads. I'm okay with government doing national defense. I'm glad there's an IDF. I think it's great that they protect the country. They would probably do a lot of things that are not great, and it's probably too big for reasons that have to do with corruption and special interests and so on. At least that's the way it works in the United States. Maybe it doesn't work exactly the way here, but I have a feeling there's some parts that aren't perfect. But those are not the problems. The problem is the housing, the problem is the parking, the problem is the education, the problem is the food supply, which is restricted. The problem is the cartels, the special interests that make us pay more for food. That's what's wrong with, those are the biggest problems that Israel faces in terms of economics, right? So there should be in my view, lower tariffs, more competition, because the government keeps those cartels sometimes in place. It's just some obvious things that would be better, to me. Yeah.
I think one of the things you say is there is a lot of things that you think the government should be less involved, and there's things you say that's okay. I don't understand if you're saying that's okay because there is some value difference in your mind, or just because you say there is more pressing stuff in the.
No, not more pressing. No, it's that the outcome. Let's take an example. I used to live in St. Louis, Missouri, okay, in the middle of the United States. In 1990-ish, after the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of Russian Jews came to Israel and came to the United States. And I've written about this. I apologize if you know the story. But we got assigned to a Russian family, a former Soviet Union family. They're like me. Their Hebrew's terrible. They can't speak the language. They don't know how to go to a grocery store. They don't know the culture. They don't know the rules. So we take them to the grocery store. My wife and I take these two people to the grocery store. You should have seen it's like a movie. Their faces, they couldn't believe it. They could not believe how much food there was in the grocery store. They spent a long time in the fruits and vegetables because they'd never seen anything like it. There's nothing like it in Moscow, nothing. At the end of the trip, we're in bad English, bad Yiddish, trying to talk to them. It was clear that the woman of the house, the Russian woman, wanted to bake bread, and she needed yeast. I don't know how to say it in Hebrew, but yeast, great. Yeast is what you need to make Hebrew. Yeast is very small, physically. There's not a big yeast section in a grocery. There's two kinds of yeast in America, probably here. There's wet and there's dry. The wet is in these little cubes and the dry is in little packages. It takes up, in a grocery store that's the size of 2 or 3 all the way through to the other wall, it takes up about this much space. So we're having trouble finding it. We're looking around. We can't find it. I go up to a guy in the store. I say, I can't find the yeast. Oh, let me show you. I'll bring some out. They were out. He goes in the back, brings us some yeast. The woman looks at me like this, the Russian woman. Special guy. They bring out the yeast for him. I got an important person to be my person in America. She didn't realize that everybody gets the yeast, right? So there's an area in the Soviet Union where the government was playing with the food supply. Big difference. Not good at it. Starvation, right? Famine in Ukraine. They're really bad at running the food supply. So on that one, no brainer. Private sector, much better than government sector. Much better. National parks, it's not that it's not important. I love national parks. It's not obvious to me that a profit-driven national park or even a nonprofit one is going to do a dramatically better job. So I don't want to fight a battle there. That's all. I can make a case for a private one.
I just want to understand your answer is that the way to choose which parts I want to give less involvement to the government is what I already know that the government
does
badly.
Like education is a perfect example. What a horrible idea to take the entire youth of a country and focus them on passing an exam at the end of their high school called the Bagrut. And I'm sure there is one person here, maybe two, who actually went to a high school where they cared about something else. They taught you something, where you read a book, where you learned how to write. But it's not common. It's not a good thing. It's not a disaster. Country works really well, right? A lot of people manage to overcome it. Education is not formal education. Classroom education is not the only place we learn things. People teach themselves stuff. It works out okay. Even if not everybody goes to Shalem College, they go to another school. It's okay. But I think that's a big one. I think that's a terrible one. I think that could be a lot better, not just a little better, and for all kinds of reasons. Yeah.
I'm not really familiar. I don't have in-depth knowledge of economic literature.
Neither do I.
Is economics concentrated more on understanding the right thing to do or how to get it done? In other words, for instance, take a problem like culture. I'm more into culture, so like a culture problem like literacy in the Arab world. Very few people, even if they are literate, they don't read books. There's no culture of reading books. So that obviously has consequences if people don't read books.
Could be a plus.
Why?
Books are dangerous. Get some bad ideas if you're not careful. I happen to love books. It's my life. I love books.
They have time to farm.
What?
They have time
To farm, yeah. Very meaningful. Now, let me answer your question. Economics has almost nothing to say about what should be done and everything to say about how to get it done, the best way to do it. Economists like to brag, like to boast. Oh, we don't have values. We're engineers. Now, in reality, it's not totally true, of course. People have preferences. But in general, economists would argue that they are value-free. Whether that's true or not is a different question. But they're much more involved in how to get things done than as to what should get done. Yeah. Yeah.
You didn't get the bottom line why economic freedom for you it's very good, because I think you can also get dignity and autonomy in different other ways, and also the right of ownership, זכות הקניין. I'm not sure it's on the same level as other rights. Like you can say the right of ownership is maybe less than other rights, and also you can have dignity or autonomy for all population in different משטרים. Ever משטרים?
Yeah, policy regimes.
Yeah.
Sure.
You can have you can make a regime where everyone who works in a cooperative,
Cooperative, yeah.
Yeah, so he also owns stocks in this.
Sure.
And also you can have like, okay.
No, you can try. There are many variations.
Like why this way?
There are many variations of economic systems. Certainly, they can have dignity. One of my favorite jokes, not quite sure who said it, is under capitalism, man oppresses man, but under communism, it's the other way around.
I think it was Ruppert when he was the General Secretary of the UN.
I don't think so. I don't think he invented it. I'm not sure. But anyway, every system has the potential for exploitation, right? Every system has people who have despair and sadness. Every system has people with dignity, right? There are plenty of people who have dignity in France. France has a big government relative to, say, the United States. So it's a question of, what? What?
She approves what you said.
You agree or don't agree?
No, I agree. I am not sure anymore that it's true that France is a bigger government, but the gap between the U.S. and France
Is smaller than it used to be. Yeah, yeah. So it's true you can have dignity. I mean, think about a kibbutz. Kibbutz is a beautiful idea. Hard to sustain, right? Most people who grew up at a kibbutz didn't want to stay in them. What?
There's only 3 kibbutzes actually active.
Now? Yeah. So I love the idea. Here's the key. I should probably go soon. No, it was only 8:47. I thought it was 9:30. I'm looking at your watch. Okay. So, no comment. What was I going to say? Something about dignity. Yeah, I was going to say something about a kibbutz, though. I was going to say. What? Yeah.
I mean, the beauty of a system where there's economic freedom is actually you can do whatever you want in that system. So you can actually have a TV.
That's true.
A system that is really free. The reverse isn't true. It's like if you're in a very, very command and control economy, you can't have any part that's actually functioning as a free. So in a way, when you have economic freedom, when you have such a regime, you also have that incredible freedom of living the life you want and whatever meaning. I mean, you can be.
Basically, what you're saying right now is where there is no law, you can choose to obey which law you want.
Again,
when there is law, you can't choose.
Economic freedom doesn't mean, as Russ has made it very clear, economic freedom doesn't mean that there's no rule of law.
No,
right?
I'm giving you an example for another field. Like, you're saying if we have free economy, each one can choose how to express his wants in the economy.
Including the ability to live under a
socialist
regime
economy
that is completely.
Yeah, but it's like saying when you don't say anything about it, you don't say right and wrong, so everybody can do whatever they want. It's also true about the law. I can give no laws, and then everybody can choose, and you can choose which laws you agree and not agree. Doesn't mean you have it's the right system.
I'm going to come back to this point. I'm going to try a different way to think about it. A family is a socialist enterprise. It's top down. It's not a democracy. It's authoritarian. Maybe there's 2 people who run it, but not more than 2, the parents, right? And that world is very beautiful, right? In that world, everybody gets the same number of cookies. Everybody gets the same number of pieces of chicken. Everybody gets the same number of apples. In fact, somebody who is not gifted might get more than the other people because their parents love them and want them to feel valued. And at this extreme, we have the government decides everything. Like a family, except there aren't parents, there's Stalin. Or if you want a nice person, it's funny, it's hard to think about a dictatorship with a nice person. I can't think of one, but we could imagine it. We could imagine it, right? And so in the real world, in a way, there's a continuum of how far you want to push the family. So if you start here, and not every family works well, by the way. There are families that are so, that have issues that they don't work well, but a lot of families work pretty well. So we can go from the family to the kibbutz, right? The kibbutz is an attempt to create a family of more than 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. It's a family of 500. It was hard for many people. The family didn't work at that level very well, right? Then we can go up another level and we can go to China under Mao, which before we understood fully what he was about, seemed like a socialism, kind of nice. He was a horrible man, evil, killed millions of people, made horrible economic decisions, a wicked man. But he tried to take the family to a nation, you could argue. I don't think it works well. And my objection, most of what I said tonight is not about morality. It's about outcomes. It's ontological. It's about how this world plays out in reality. But you could argue that this world, the Mao world, or the Stalin world, or the Pol Pot world, or the you name it world, that world isn't just an unpleasant place to live. It's a wicked place to live. And some people felt that way about the kibbutz, right? Your children spend every night in the hall instead of in their parents' bedroom or house. Is that normal? I don't know. A lot of people thought that was not a kind thing to do to their children, and they left, or they didn't want to grow up with their own children that way. So a lot of this is not a question of, I'm influenced. I did a recent interview with Nassim Taleb on this question of what's the right scale for a country? How big should a country be? How diverse can a country be and still stay together? But you can think about that for the family. How far can you extend the bonds of love and have it work well? So, Peter Singer, how many people here know who Peter Singer is? Philosopher, Australian philosopher. He argues you should treat everybody the same. He got in big trouble because he took care of his mother. He got his mother special health care, like a health care provider, somebody to take care of her. That's not right. He should have taken that money. He admitted, I don't agree with him. He said that was immoral. I should have used that money for a stranger. I could have done more good in the world. I think that's a misunderstanding. I don't agree with that as a human enterprise, but that's the way he looks at the world. You could look at the world that way. I don't, but you could. You could say, we should treat everyone with this equal amount of love. Just because they were born out of my genetic material doesn't morally give them any authority for my actions. I should not treat my own children any differently than your children. And if your child needs more help than my child does, just like I help my poorest child more than my richest child, I should help your poorest child more than my poorest child if they're poorer than I am. We should help people in foreign countries who are super poor. He believes you shouldn't throw a birthday party for your kid. It's immoral. You should be preventing malaria. Interesting argument. I don't think most human beings act that way. Doesn't work for them, but that's an interesting argument. So to me, a lot of the arguments for socialism or for a more collective form of economics is a hope that people would not respond to the natural incentives that those systems have. You could try it. We've tried it, actually. It doesn't work so well, but maybe you could do it a different way. Yeah, we go. Yeah, in the back. Come on, Bob. What?
What about climate policies?
Climate policy? So yes, that's an example.
Like limiting carbon emissions for certain companies because it can hurt agriculture.
Sure. So that's a classic example of what in economics is called an externality, where your actions, a lot of my story is about what you might call feedback loops, what you could call incentives, what you could call in English skin in the game. Did they say that, Beaverit? No. What would you say? Is there an expression like it? What? No. But you've heard that expression? Yes. Right? To have skin in the game. I don't know where the expression comes from. What? Not the same. Okay. So the argument for skin in the game, the argument for incentives, is that you should be able to capture gains when you behave well, and you should pay a consequence or price when you act badly, right? Externalities are a way that you push the consequences onto other people. the negative consequences, right? Or positive, right? So if you give to tzedakah, if you give to charity, if you are kind to other people, that's a positive externality because other people benefit seeing that person better off. You're not the only one who sees that gain. And similarly, pollution, it's the main one, is a negative externality where if I throw my garbage in your yard, I don't have any costs of the garbage and you have to deal with it. It's wrong. So there are different ways to deal with, coming back to the earlier question, there are different ways to deal with pollution, right? You can do it from the top down. You can do it more decentralized. A lot of regulation in the United States to fight pollution is done in a way that is not well constructed because political forces, to take a simple example, coal in the western part of the United States is low sulfur, and coal in the eastern part of the United States is high sulfur. So it's better to use coal from the west than coal from the east. But in the east, the coal is in West Virginia, which is in a state with a very powerful politician for a long time, Robert Byrd. So he made sure that the regulations were written in a way that protected the demand for his state's coal. But still better than nothing. It's probably better to reduce the amount of total coal used and the sulfur that was produced. So again, that would be an example where the private incentives of leaving it alone and having limited government, probably not so attractive, right? There are still going to be some economic capitalist incentives to reduce pollution because pollution is wasteful and you can make more profit if you can figure out a way to produce less garbage, right? If you look, my favorite example, don't have one here, a soda can made out of aluminum, which you can squeeze with your 2 fingers. When I was a little boy, you could not move it at all. It had a lot more aluminum. Why? Not because people have become more environmentally conscious. It's cheaper to make a can with less aluminum, and they always wanted to. They couldn't figure out a way to make a can with less aluminum that would do what? Not collapse, not break. They figured it out. It's a great YouTube video, by the way, on how it is that they figured that out. You notice, if you look at the top of a can, that little lip, that little rim at the top is a genius idea which allows it to absorb more weight than it otherwise would and not collapse. Incredible thing.
Okay.